I was briefed in a windowless room deep in the belly of an unmarked research facility. The kind of place where the air feels stale, where the walls seem to close in, whispering that no one would hear you if you screamed. They handed me a file, stamped for eyes only, the kind of stamp that meant reading it was an invitation to disappear. I should have said no. I should have walked out. But curiosity is a hell of a drug. Inside were grainy sonar images of something impossibly large buried in the South Atlantic Ridge, a place where the ocean floor drops into darkness few had ever seen. The coordinates placed it over 5 miles deep in a trench that, until 2 weeks ago, didn't officially exist. "This isn't a wreck," the man across from me had said, pushing a single audio file across the table. "This thing started broadcasting." He hit play. A low, pulsing signal throbbed through the speakers, unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't Morse. It wasn't whale song. It wasn't even human. I listened, my gut twisting into knots. "Do we have a translation?" I asked. The man exhaled, a slow, deliberate sigh. No one who listens long enough stays sane. I should have walked away, but I didn't. 2 weeks later, I was strapped into the Abyss 9, a prototype deep-sea submersible, descending into the endless black. The mission was simple: find the source of the signal, document it, and get out. There were 3 of us on board. Lieutenant O'Donnell, ex-Navy, our pilot, hands steady as stone. He'd spent years in classified underwater operations, the kind of missions no one talked about. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was all muscle memory. Check depth, check pressure, check comms. No wasted breath. Dr. Henshaw, the team's lead scientist, was the opposite. Nervous energy wrapped in a too thin frame. He tapped his fingers against the console, muttering equations under his breath like a prayer. He had spent his life chasing the unknown, and it had hollowed him out. And then there was me. They call me a specialist, which was government shorthand for "we don't have a better word for what you do." I studied anomalies, things that didn't fit the rules of reality. The walls of the sub creaked as we descended. Past 1,000 meters, the sunlight vanished. Past 3,000, the world outside turned into a void so black it seemed to swallow light whole. At 5,200 meters, our floodlights flickered against something unnatural. Metal, not rusted, not broken, whole. The structure emerged from the darkness like the bones of something long buried. It was massive, stretching out beyond our visibility. The sonar couldn't map its edges. It wasn't human. Henshaw pressed his face against the thick glass. That's not a ship." O'Donnell exhaled sharply. "Then what the hell is it?" I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs. A facility. It was built into the trench wall, fused with the rock like it had been there for centuries. The exterior wasn't corroded. No marine life had claimed it. It was sealed, untouched, waiting. The signal had stopped the moment we arrived. My headset crackled. The Thanatos, our research vessel on the surface, patched through. "Abyss 9, you've reached the anomaly. Report status." I forced my voice steady. "We have visual confirmation of structure. It's intact." Silence. "Then, proceed with caution." O'Donnell adjusted our thrusters, bringing us toward what looked like a breach in the exterior. A collapsed section revealing an opening large enough for the sub. A chill ran through me. The pressure down here should have crushed anything that wasn't reinforced. And yet, this hole was perfectly still, as if something had made it. Henshaw's fingers hovered over his console. "We need to send in a drone first." O'Donnell didn't move. Something primal twisted inside me, something that whispered, "Get out. Leave. Now." Instead, I swallowed the feeling and said, "We're going in." The moment we crossed the threshold, the sub's instruments flickered. Our depth readout glitched, flashing nonsense. The internal temperature dropped. O'Donnell swore, tapping at the controls. "Something's messing with our systems." Henshaw turned pale. "The walls, they're moving." I snapped my gaze to the viewport. The walls weren't moving. They were breathing. A slow, rhythmic pulse like the facility itself was alive. The metal had a texture not quite organic, not quite artificial. It shimmered when our lights hit it, shifting between solid and liquid. And then we saw the bodies. At first, I thought they were statues, human shapes fused into the walls, mouths open in silent screams. But they weren't statues. They were mummified. I fought back bile. Their uniforms were still intact, frozen in time, patches still visible. U.S. military insignias. Henshaw exhaled sharply. Some of these men went missing in the 50s. My voice came out hoarse. That's not possible. Then the whispering started. Not over the comms. Not in our headsets. Inside the sub. The sound slithered along the metal walls. Dozens of voices overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. You came back. A flash of movement. Something skittered just beyond our lights. Too fast to see. Too many limbs. O'Donnell grabbed the controls. We're leaving. I wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed to turn back. Then Henshaw did something very, very stupid. He reached out and pressed his hand against the console. A low, resonating hum rippled through the walls. The mummified bodies twitched, and the door ahead of us opened. Beyond it, a corridor stretched into darkness. At the end of it, something glowed red. The whispering grew louder. You came back. I swallowed against the dread rising in my throat. O'Donnell, keep the engines running. Henshaw turned to me, eyes too wide. We have to see what's inside. I stared down the corridor, into that impossible, waiting dark. Somewhere deep inside, I knew we had already gone too far, and something was waiting for us. The corridor loomed ahead, an open maw swallowing the light from our flood lamps. The walls still pulsed, slow and deliberate, like the rhythm of something breathing. The air inside the sub felt heavier, tinged with an edge of static. The whispering hadn't stopped. You came back. I clenched my fists. That voice? No. Voices had no source. No comm signal. No logical explanation. But logic was already unraveling. O'Donnell gritted his teeth. I don't like this. Neither did I, but we had to go in. Henshaw activated his suit's helmet mic. We won't get another chance. If we can recover records from inside, we'll know what this place is. I didn't believe that. Not entirely. But something deeper than curiosity was pulling at me. Like this place knew me. Like it had been waiting. O'Donnell kept the sub running while Henshaw and I stepped through the breach, our suits humming with pressure adjustments. The moment our boots touched the floor, the walls shuddered, as if registering our presence. The whispering turned into something worse. Laughter. It came from nowhere, but it was there, twisting through my skull. Too many voices speaking in a cadence that felt wrong, like echoes of things that had never been human. Henshaw had gone pale inside his helmet. Let's move. We advanced slowly, beams of light piercing the gloom. The passage narrowed ahead, curving slightly downward, as if leading us deeper beneath the ocean floor. The metal here looked different. Darker, smoother, not corroded at all. Then we saw them. The containment pods. Dozens lined the corridor, fused to the walls. Some shattered, their glass blown inward as if whatever had been inside forced its way out. Others remained intact, their surfaces obscured by condensation from the inside. And inside one, something moved. A shape, tall, gaunt. Its bones pressed against too tight skin, its fingers twitching. I stopped breathing. Henshaw's voice was a whisper. Jesus. The thing inside the pod jerked suddenly, its head snapping toward us. Its mouth opened too wide, revealing a row of jagged, needle-thin teeth. And it smiled. Then the lights flickered. A sharp, electric crackle tore through my headset, O'Donnell shouting. Systems are failing. Get back here now. Henshaw backed up first, but the moment he turned, the corridor shifted. The walls twisted, warping, stretching into themselves. The passage was no longer straight. It was a spiraling tunnel, curling downward in an impossible loop. Something was changing this place as we moved. The air itself was wrong, the pressure fluctuating between deep-sea crushing and eerie weightlessness. Henshaw grabbed my arm. We have to run. We sprinted back, our boots thudding against metal that wasn't the same floor we had stepped onto. The pods along the walls began to vibrate, their contents shifting. Something behind us shrieked. I didn't turn. I would not look back. We reached the breach. O'Donnell was waiting, one hand gripping the sub's external handle, eyes wild. Move, move, move. Henshaw scrambled through first. I followed, and the lights inside the sub went out. Total darkness. Only the heavy sound of my own breathing, the sharp hum of failing systems. And then, a second voice inside my headset. Not O'Donnell, not Henshaw. A whisper, right inside my skull. You cannot leave. I lunged forward, gripping the edge of the sub's hatch as something brushed against my ankle. Something cold and wet and wrong. I kicked off, hurling myself into the sub's cabin. The hatch slammed shut. The emergency lights flickered back on. O'Donnell was already wrestling with the controls. We're leaving. I don't care what the hell you found. We're done. Henshaw was shaking, his breathing erratic. I couldn't speak. Something had touched me. I sat down, gripping my own arm to stop my hand from trembling. My left boot was wet. O'Donnell powered up the engines. The sub shuddered violently, resisting the movement. The structure was still shifting around us. The breach was closing, metal bending inward. We shot forward, just barely clearing the exit before the entire passage sealed shut behind us. The sub jerked as we hit open water. The whole trench shook, and then the signal came back. Louder, clearer, a voice, not whispering anymore, speaking. I turned toward the console, where the sonar readout displayed a single, pulsating frequency. Henshaw pressed a shaking hand to his earpiece, adjusting the audio feed. And then we heard it. A voice, our voices, speaking in perfect unison. You came back. I stared at the sonar. My stomach turned to ice. The transmission wasn't coming from the structure anymore. It was coming from inside the sub. O'Donnell swore, checking the power levels. Something's still in here. The emergency lights flickered again. A second transmission layered over the first. This time, it was different. Deeper. Distorted. Wrong. It spoke a single word. One I understood without knowing why. Prisoner. My breath hitched. Henshaw shivered violently. It's not broadcasting a distress signal. I turned to him, stomach twisting into a knot of ice. He swallowed. It's calling for the guards. The sub suddenly jerked, metal groaning under a force we couldn't see. The pressure outside spiked. Something was moving in the trench. Something big. O'Donnell gripped the controls. Hold on. Then the world went black. Darkness swallowed the sub. Not just the absence of light, a complete, suffocating void. My body was weightless. My breath barely existed. The pressure suit encasing me should have felt tight, restrictive, but suddenly I wasn't sure I had a body at all. The sub was still there. I could feel the chair beneath me, the vague sense of my fingers pressing into the armrests. But it was distant, like a fading memory. A voice not my own whispered inside my skull. You are waking up. The darkness peeled away, not like light returning, but as though I had been inside something alive, and it was letting me go. The sub's lights flickered violently, static hissing through the comms. My fingers flexed, I could move again. O'Donnell's voice cracked through the speakers. Systems are coming back. Jesus Christ. What the hell just happened? Henshaw gasped, shuddering in his seat. He had his hands pressed against his helmet, his breathing erratic. We weren't just out, he muttered. We weren't here at all. I didn't have time to question it. Outside the viewport, something moved. The trench wasn't empty anymore. Shapes drifted through the deep. Hundreds of them, twisting, flickering, like shadows cast by something massive just outside our vision. They weren't swimming. They weren't walking. They just existed, shifting in and out of space, moving in ways my mind couldn't grasp. One passed directly in front of the sub. For a brief, shattering moment, our floodlights illuminated its face. It had no eyes, no mouth, only stretched, waxen skin pulled taut over a skull-like shape. Its body was humanoid, but wrong. Too long, too thin, bending at impossible angles. It turned toward us. I don't know how I knew it was looking at me, but I felt it. A sensation so cold it scraped against my bones. The whispering returned, louder this time, pressing against the walls, seeping into my skull. They were speaking, but not to us, to something else. O'Donnell's knuckles were white on the controls. We have to go. Now. The engines roared, the sub lurching forward, and then the pressure spiked. A deep, rumbling force wrapped around us, something invisible but suffocating. The water didn't ripple. The trench didn't shake, but we felt it. Something was waking up. Henshaw let out a strangled cry, his eyes wide with sudden horror. The pods. I turned. The bodies in the pods we had seen before, they were moving. They were opening. One by one, the shattered glass burst outward, releasing figures into the water, figures that should not have been alive. Their bodies were mummified, their faces frozen in expressions of agony, but their limbs twitched. Their heads snapped toward us. A low, grinding wail echoed through the trench, and the whispers stopped. That was worse, because it meant they had noticed us. O'Donnell slammed the thrusters to full power. The sub groaned, shaking violently as we accelerated. But we weren't alone anymore. The things, the prisoners, they followed. Not swimming, not drifting. They simply moved, appearing closer every time the lights flickered. One of them latched onto the sub. The entire vessel jerked, metal shrieking under the strain. I turned to the viewport and stared directly into a face that wasn't human anymore. Its eyes were nothing but voids, stretching back into an infinite, bottomless hunger. Its mouth, if it had ever been a mouth, split open into something too wide, too empty. And then it spoke, not in whispers, not in a language I didn't know. It spoke in my voice. "You're the last one." The glass of the viewport cracked. Alarms blared. Pressure warnings screamed. O'Donnell snarled. "I can't shake it." Henshaw wasn't moving. He was frozen in his seat, his head tilted back, eyes unfocused. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I grabbed him, shaking him violently. "Henshaw, stay with me." He blinked. Once, twice, then slowly turned to me and smiled. We never left. My stomach turned inside out. He grabbed my wrist, fingers ice cold through the suit. "We've always been here." Then he lunged for the controls. O'Donnell reacted first, shoving him back, but it was too late. Henshaw had already ripped the pressure equalizer offline. A deafening roar shook the sub as the internal pressure fluctuated violently. O'Donnell lost control. The sub tilted sharply, spinning, careening downward into the trench. Everything went white. A memory surfaced. I was standing in the facility. Not in a suit. Not in the sub. Standing in the corridor, watching the pods open. I turned and saw myself. A perfect, identical copy, standing in the same suit, the same body, staring back at me. Behind my duplicate, the prisoners were waking up. One of them reached for him, and he didn't resist. The memory shattered as I slammed back into reality. The sub was still spinning, alarms screaming. Henshaw was laughing, his voice layered, shifting between too many voices at once. O'Donnell shouted, fighting the controls. "I can't pull up." Then, impact. The trench floor rushed toward us. A massive structure loomed out of the dark, another part of the facility buried in the silt. We hit it hard. Everything snapped to black. I woke to silence. A deep, suffocating silence. My body ached, gravity pressing me down. The sub's emergency lights flickered dimly. O'Donnell was slumped over the controls, unmoving. Henshaw was gone. The viewport was fractured, but not broken. Outside, the trench was still, but something was different. I turned slowly and froze. We weren't alone in the sub. A figure stood in the far corner. Tall, unmoving, watching. Not one of the prisoners. Not one of the things outside. It was wearing a suit identical to mine. A perfect, identical copy. It lifted its hand, my hand, and pressed a single finger to its lips. Silence. The comms crackled. A voice, O'Donnell's, barely above a whisper. We were never supposed to find this place. The emergency lights flickered, and the thing wearing my face smiled. The thing wearing my face didn't move. Neither did I. O'Donnell stirred beside me, groaning as he came to. His breathing was ragged, disoriented. I could feel his confusion even before he spoke. What the hell just happened? I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on the thing in the corner. It was perfect. Too perfect. Same suit. Same face. Same way my chest rose and fell. But its eyes, those were wrong. Black pits that stretched too far back. It smiled again. My stomach flipped. O'Donnell followed my gaze and froze. His hand dropped to his sidearm. "That's not you." The thing tilted its head. The way it moved, it was learning. Then it spoke. In my voice. "You are waking up." The same phrase I'd heard in the dark. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. "What are you?" It took a slow step forward. O'Donnell pulled his gun. "I swear to God, don't move." The thing stopped, but its smile never faded. And then, the whispers started again. Not outside, inside, filling the sub. The radio hadn't been activated, but our comms were alive with voices. Layers upon layers, overlapping. Ours. O'Donnell's. Mine. Henshaw's. Henshaw. A pit opened in my stomach. I turned, scanning the sub. He was gone. No sign of a body, no suit, no trail. O'Donnell cursed, gripping the controls. "We need to get out of here." The system was dead. No power. No engines. The pressure was stable, somehow, but we were stranded at the bottom of the trench. And the whispering was getting louder. The thing wearing my face stepped closer. I didn't move. Then, it started changing. Its body stretched, skin crawling like liquid as its features began to unstitch. My face melted into something else. Something taller. Its neck elongated. Its limbs thinned, fingers extending into something needle-like. The last remnants of my reflection faded. What stood before me was not human, and it had never been. I reached for O'Donnell's arm. "We have to." The sub shifted. Metal groaned. A dull pressure wave rippled through the hull. Something outside was moving. Something big. O'Donnell braced against the controls. What the hell was that? My throat was dry. I knew what it was. The prison had opened, and something had noticed. The sonar pinged, a single massive contact. It wasn't moving toward us. It was awakening. The whispers turned into a voice. One that didn't come from the radio. One that came from inside my head. "It remembers you." My vision blurred, not from fear, but from something else. A memory. I was standing in the corridor again. Not the sub, not the trench, the facility. The first time, I turned, saw the pods lining the walls, their inhabitants twitching. Not dead, not alive, something in between. A figure stood beside me. I couldn't see its face, only its reflection in the glass. And it was wearing my face. "You did this," it whispered. I gasped. The memory fractured. I snapped back. O'Donnell was shaking my shoulder. "You blanked out." I licked my lips. My throat was dry as sandpaper. I think my voice came out hoarse. "I think I've been here before." O'Donnell stared at me, unblinking. "What?" I swallowed. "I don't think this is a prison." Silence. Outside, something pressed against the hull. A massive shape shifting in the dark. Not mechanical, not organic. Something older than either. A structure that had never been built, but had always existed. The thing that had taken my face wasn't watching us anymore. It was watching the trench. Waiting. O'Donnell's breathing picked up. "We have to leave. If we can restore power." A deep, resonating hum cut him off. The sub shuddered, and I understood. I knew what the signal was. Not a distress call, not a warning. It was a lock, and we had broken it. The massive thing outside the sub. It wasn't just a prisoner. It was the warden. O'Donnell turned to me, panic flashing in his eyes. "How do we stop this?" My head pounded. Fragments of memory clawed their way to the surface. The pods. The facility. I had seen it before. Not in reports. Not in mission files. I had been here. I had helped build it. And I had failed. I met O'Donnell's gaze. Something cold and final settling in my bones. "We don't stop it." His face twisted. "The hell does that mean?" "It means we were never supposed to leave." I looked at the thing standing across from us. It was watching me, waiting. I took a slow breath, and I understood. The memory returned, sharp and clear. I was in the facility. The first time, I was wearing a different suit, a different name, standing in front of the pods, and the things inside them were screaming. I had sealed them, one by one, not prisoners, guards, not things trying to escape, things trying to stop it from spreading. We hadn't built a prison. We had built a quarantine, and we had just opened the door. I snapped back, my hands shaking. O'Donnell's voice was distant. "Say something, damn it." The whispering swelled, and then the sub's power returned. Every screen, every alarm, every flickering system. all at once. The controls lit up. I turned to the viewport. The thing outside was still waiting. But I understood now. We were never supposed to leave. But someone had to seal the door again. I moved before I could stop myself. I grabbed the manual override. O'Donnell's eyes widened. Wait. I twisted it hard. The sub lurched, power flooding into the reactor. A warning screeched through the cabin. Overload detected. Evacuation recommended. O'Donnell's face turned pale. What the hell are you doing? I forced a smile. Locking the door. The thing where my face nodded. I slammed the final release. The sub's reactor surged. A shockwave rippled through the trench, the pressure spiking, and the world collapsed. I opened my eyes. Bright. Too bright. The hum of a ship's engines. The smell of sterile air. I was lying on a cot. Someone was speaking. Voices. I turned my head. A man stood over me. A face I recognized. A voice I had heard before. Welcome back, Doctor. Are you ready to begin your mission? I blinked. The signal started again.